Start off with Tim Tufuga here. Another day on the road. Just had this interesting meeting with the ASEAN leaders, meeting in Malaysia, and US Secretary of State Rubio just met with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in Malaysia just last couple of days ago. That's as close as Rubio and Lavrov has been to Australia, which is very interesting, as well as the Chinese Foreign Minister. They all met at ASEAN. Now, as a geopolitical strategist point of view, the implication of the ASEAN meeting in Southeast Asia and Malaysia is particularly important for Australia's relations. The Australian Prime Minister is presently in China, meeting with the President Xi, or at least attempting to meet President Xi, in order to discuss trade relations between Australia and the implications of the Trump tariffs on global regional trade and the global implications of the Trump administration and the MAGA tariff mercantilist system. Mercantilism is being practiced by Donald Trump. Now, if you are a national security and strategist, you would understand the theory of strategic mercantilism. That is what is happening in the current world politics and the global paradigm shift and the dynamic changes that are occurring now in 2025. Now, I am a postgraduate scholar of national security. I had done extensive writings and discussions on the topics of national security, particularly from a Samoan Australian point of view. So my purview is national security. And the recent meetings in ASEAN, and the 2025 ASEAN meeting, is the peak body for the Asian nations, and the head of that peak body is no doubt is none other than China. But within that peak body in ASEAN also includes Pacific Island nations and peripheral nations, which are the superpowers: China, Russia, and USA. So the United States head was represented by Rubio as the Secretary of State. And this meeting was particularly interesting since they were discussing the Afghanistan 2.0. Now, the Afghanistan 2.0 is the Ukrainian war, with America having to return to supplying weapons via NATO into the Ukrainian conflict. So it has only just continued to prolong the Afghanistan-like war. So it's like a reversion back to Operation Enduring Freedom. Now, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, not to be mistaken with the Filipino Operation Enduring Freedom. That is a different matter entirely. But we are referring to the one that the whole world knows, which is the war in Afghanistan with ISAF, with the International Stabilization Afghanistan Force. ISAF was the NATO, US, and Australian-backed, what we called in Australia Operation Slipper. Operation Slipper was the operation, the ADF operation, with the deployment of Australian Defence Force operatives and elements into Afghanistan. New Zealand was similar as well. They had their own version. They were based in Bamiyan. In the meantime, the conflict in Ukraine is a conflict which is interesting insofar as it's deja vu of the perpetuation of prolonged warfare, a deja vu that we are all too familiar with. Now, this only supports the notion that the war in Ukraine only benefits the military-industrial complexes of various interest parties, the multinational enterprises along the military-industrial complexes of America, no doubt, and European nations, and weapons manufacturers, munitions, and so forth. So, in particular, the drones technology is the drones manufacturing industries is booming, including Australia. Australia's SIPAC and their cardboard drones are notoriously renowned throughout Russia. SIPAC, a cardboard box drone company, is notoriously renowned amongst the Russians. Based in Melbourne, they've been manufacturing hundreds of cardboard drones and exporting them to Ukraine for use in the military operations throughout Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine. That the SIPAC cardboard drones have a very notorious, infamous repute implicating Australia. Now, these things are nasty pieces of work that has not been notified to the Australian public. So, in the meantime, back to the Ukrainian conflict. The Americans have resumed their military support of Ukraine, and thus the war continues, similar to Operation Enduring Freedom. Now, what's the likely outcome? Well, it seems it's going to prolong the inevitable, which is yet another defeat for NATO and America. As I had predicted back in 2022 when I wrote about it, and I discussed it earlier. And unlike the Nuremberg 2.0, and that's what's going to happen now, is that the leaders of the Ukrainian political leaders who perpetuated the conflict of Minsk 2.0 and the now notorious failures of the Istanbul Turkish-led peace discussions. Istanbul and Turkey are trying to broker the ceasefire. The outcome of the Istanbul 3.0 is most likely may result in a Nuremberg 2.0, whereby the perpetrators of the conflict, namely the Boris Johnsons and the Macron and the Liz Truss and the and the Bidens of yesteryear, who started it all the conflict since Minsk 2.0, may be held accountable by means of Nuremberg trial, and somebody will be swinging from the rafters, and it won't be the Russians, because what's happening now is that the Russians are most likely going to win the war. Now, when the Russians win the war, to the victors goes the spoils. And that means the losers will have to account. And the International Criminal Court and the International Criminal Justice, the court trying to arrest President Putin, will lose. That's what's going to happen. And all the so-called arraignment of President Putin as a war criminal won't work, because Russia will win the war. And that is going to piss off the ICC, because it's either that, with the result of the Istanbul 3.0 meeting, either that or we will have World War III, because President Putin isn't going to lose. So what does appear to be happening is that America looks as though it's going to lose yet another war. Now, whereas the Taliban had won the last war, which lasted 20 years, we're going to see the Americans lose, and Europe, especially Europe, they're going to lose a war against the Russians. Now, you're going to prolong the war so that all the people who were the decision makers can hopefully run away like Poroshenko, and then delegate the responsibilities of the conflict to others. In this instance, delegate it to Zelensky and all these people who are in the Ukrainian Rada are all quitting and running away. When they run away, they're not held accountable for the conflict. So that's what's happening with people like Boris Johnson and Hollande and Poroshenko, who were all the staunch war hawks, the hawks of the Ukrainian war, who have all disappeared from the scene. So, the situation in Ukraine is going to be very interesting. We've got the Istanbul 3.0 later on this month. So Russia and Ukraine are going to meet again to thrash out their terms for ceasefire, which is just to prolong the war until somebody leaves or somebody gets assassinated or something dramatic happens, because the Russians will continue to resort to their denazification, thinning out the Ukrainian military elements from the front lines, as the Russians continue to liberate more of the DPR and LPR and Kherson and Zaporizhia, whilst taking some more of Kharkov cities and areas to insult the Ukrainians. In fact, Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian forces, had actually stated that the Ukrainian military are intending to take more of the Russian territories and to return to Kursk. So that seems to be a little bit of black humor, poignant turn of events in terms of the Ukrainian war, whereby the Ukrainians are intending to retake Kursk. Now, why Kursk? Well, two things comes to mind. First of all, 1942, the Kursk War, the Operation Barbarossa by the Wehrmacht and the Sixth Army had the largest tank battle that was fought in Kursk. Now that is being commemorated with this Kursk incursion. Secondly, and probably perhaps more importantly, Kursk is where none other than Nikita Khrushchev was born. Now Nikita Khrushchev was responsible for the 1954 surrendering of Crimea to Ukraine from Russia. Now, what is interesting about Crimea is that Crimea was always Russian, and it was peopled by the indigenous people, which were the Crimean Tatars, up until the period when in 1954 Nikita Khrushchev gave Crimea to the Ukrainians. So this war is basically a war of attrition, a war in which Ukrainians are dying and Russians are dying, and people like Senator Lindsey Graham, who is a very strong advocate for this war to continue. And as he stated once, that's been publicly released, he stated that it's okay so long as Ukrainians are killing Russians. He stated that quite clearly. And that is what he's getting. The Russians are getting killed, and Ukrainians are getting killed as well as these neo-Nazi mercenaries from NATO. Now, if you haven't really been following the war since 2014, the war has been ongoing since 2014, since Euromaidan, which may be considered American-sponsored, or at least part of the courts. Never know, neither confirm nor deny. So we will view the situation of Ukraine as yet another systemic failure from Pentagon and Langley, and whoever is being held to account for these strategic missteps, we will know in due time as a Nuremberg 2.0 may eventuate. Now, who will be the star key witnesses and the key stars of these Nuremberg 2.0 in the ICC? Well, it seems as though President Putin cannot be arraigned, since being the most likely victor of this war, President Putin will not be charged with war crimes, and instead people like Poroshenko and Zelensky will be under trial in Nuremberg 2.0. Now that's what may likely happen unless something dramatically happens to change the eventual course of history. Because similar to Afghanistan, America was on the wrong side of history. And again, in 2025, as far as we can see, America is on the wrong side of history yet again with Ukraine. But as it turns out, even under Trump, the war in which he stated that he would end within 24 hours once elected as president, as it turns out, that promise has been exhausted. And the likelihood of the Lindsey Graham agenda being reasserted seems to be the most likely outcome during the Trump administration heading into the end of the 2025 period. Rubio is not part of this agenda, and it seems that Lindsey Graham is now holding the reins within the neocons, Republicans, even within the Trump administration. Lindsey Graham has been a very staunch stalwart in this anti-Russian agenda. And that Cold War mentality augurs well with the Biden agenda, which was something that has always been hardwired since 1945 during the Eisenhower Republican administration and the Truman administration, which has also led to the Kennedys' McCarthyism period with the domino theory of the Red Peril and the spread of the Comintern from the Cold War period. Now, of course, we know full well that Glasnost and Perestroika had changed the Russian communist hardline agenda, so much so that Russia had fully embraced capitalism and all the trappings associated with capitalism. But you cannot change the Lindsey Graham mindset amongst the hardwired, old school Cold War era people. They will not accept that Glasnost and Perestroika had dismantled the hardline totalitarian communism regimes, but that is the case. People will always say that communism is red under the carpets and you can't handle it because they are hardwired to think that way, even though everyone in Russia is fully integrated into the modern day capitalist individualist lifestyles and all the trappings of capitalism and modernity associated with capitalism, and people won't accept that the old communist totalitarianism has collapsed and ended since 1989. But people won't accept that. It's black and white, it's red and blue, and a communist is a communist, and a capitalist is a capitalist. So they think. But the world has changed. So the new world order, as we know, as we see it, is the challenge to the Bretton Woods system, of the de-dollarization of American capitalism. The de-dollarization, or the end of the Bretton Woods system, is the end of the reserve currency of the American dollar throughout the world, challenged no doubt by the BRICS system, and led by the Russians and the Chinese. Now, this had been initiated by the Shanghai Corporation organization, by the Chinese Russians, which were at one stage or other would have been considered as the Comintern of old in the Cold War era, but obviously they had upgraded themselves, embraced perestroika and glasnost, and have become a fully integrated mixed economic systems, and there is no more hardline Russian communist revisionism, as it were. So in a sense, the success of revisionism has been embedded amongst the modern day Russians, and this is the Putin era. Putin era is a era of personality rather than of ideology. It's the politics of personality rather than ideology, because ideology takes a back step to the politics of personality. So Putinism is reviled by people rather than ideology, because as Fukuyama had once stated in the end of history, he gave the impression that it is the end of hardline communism and the end of the Cold War. That was significant with 1989 and the creation of these separate former Warsaw Pact nations into modern-day states within the 1991 era, which also included the creation of Ukraine as an independent nation on December 1991. Now, since 1991, everything has gone pear-shaped for Ukraine. Whilst they embraced full nationalism and national sovereignty, they had compromised with their lack of integrity, with their economic fortunes, most notably with pilfering Gazprom's oil reserves through the pipelines underneath Ukraine en route to their markets, European markets. When the Kushma regime had pilfered oil and gas supplies destined for Europe, Gazprom, the Russian oil tycoon company, got angry and ordered them to pay them back for theft. That started the war that led to a lot of political upheaval and the Orange Revolution in 2004, and then all the musical chairs of the Ukrainian political situation culminating with Euromaidan in 2014. Yeah, so now we're up to date. Then we have the Minsk agreements after the 2014 Euromaidan. That was in 2015. Minsk agreement number 1 was in 2015, and then Minsk agreement number 2 was in 2019. All of which was accused by President Putin that the Minsk agreements was a delaying tactic so as to allow the Ukrainians to arm themselves, particularly from the Bucharest 9 nations supplying Soviet weaponry to the Ukrainians so that they could put up a bit of a fight in in the eventuality of a conflict between themselves and the Russians, and not just the DPR as the alleged Russians proxy. But as it turns out, the casus belli for the Australians, at least, was the MH17 shoot down, allegedly by the Russians. But it is a repeated modus operandi by the Ukrainians, drawing back to the October 2001 shoot down of a Siberian Airlines aircraft by the Ukrainians over the Black Sea, in which they also had denied that they had done it, even though Russia had overwhelmingly proved that the Ukrainians had shot down a Russian commercial airline back in 2001. Now, they got away with it in 2001. Again, they seem to have gotten used to that modus operandi of getting away with shooting down commercial airlines. It seemed that the MH17 would be more of their modus operandi as a repeat offence from 2001. But the United Nations refused to acknowledge that, nor does the ICC, and certainly not by the joint investigation team from Australia and the Dutch coppers who conducted their own allegedly independent investigation of the downing of the MH17. United Nations still to this day have accused President Putin of that alleged offence, even though the ICC had issued an arrest warrant for kidnapping children instead of MH17, which makes you wonder. On that note, I think we've digressed a fair bit from the ASEAN 2025 discussion, which is all wrapping up at the moment. Prime Minister of Australia is wrapping up his Chinese trade relations discussions whilst he's in China. Hopefully he will benefit from the tariffs war with America. Australia will come out on top in terms of maintaining their closer trading relationship with China. All in the meantime, we're left with another Afghanistan 2.0. 2.0 is a prolongation of the Ukrainian war and another prolongation of a war that is another loss to NATO, ISAF, or now it's Ukrainian war, and it's not looking good for America. And what's left in this new world order, with the rise of BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the rise of ASEAN, is a change of the world order and the decoupling of the World Trade Organization into regional groups, economic groups, the EU, the mercantilist American system, which is America's own mercantilist survival mode. And all the while, we in Australia are surviving as well through our reliance on our Sino-Australian relations. It is best that we stick with the friends that we do have, and not to burn bridges and hold on to old colonial ties that are now antiquated and irrelevant under the current change of winds, as it were. All right, enough for this long-winded chat for now. Let's see what's unfolds for the next week. Yeah, te whasawha.